Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
What happened during the pandemic, and this helped us that we were sort of one of the first working in this space. I think we had a slightly earlier run on things. We saw our customers start to come to us and say, this is how we want to take tap to pay to market. And we saw that they were all really different. And we started to say, okay, we have this period of time where there are no card present transactions happening in the world, right? Because we're all stuck at home and can't go out and buy anything face to face. When we come out of this, how do we have a solution where no matter how or what the use case is that our customer wants to go to market, that we're able to provide for that story?
That was Brad Hyett, the CEO of Phos, and he's my special guest on this episode 222 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Brad has an intense musical background with proficiency in 4 different instruments. He also makes a concerted effort to have a very strong presence in what he calls the 4 F's of life: family, fitness, fintech, and flavor. Phos is a softPOS payments orchestration platform, enabling contactless payments onto mobile devices with no requirement for payment-specific hardware. As for their competitive advantage, Brad will be the first to say that they offer a customizable solution that enables them to meet their customers where they are and take them where they want to go in a way that offers much more flexibility than their competition. Brad talks about his journey to the role of CEO, and we also talk about the evolution of contactless, as well as the upcoming M&A spree Brad predicts within the industry over the next few years. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Brad. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
So I grew up in the Midlands of the UK. I went to Lichfield Cathedral School, which was a sort of really intense music background for me. And I did a lot of music growing up through school. And I was at boarding school in Shropshire. So I had a nice childhood growing up, very much exposed to music at a very high level. And thought in my mind, my future was as a musician, unfortunately, but not in everyone else's mind. So, had to kind of think about alternatives. But growing up and background was in that sort of area, in that kind of field. And then I moved to London after university and got into various different jobs and roles. And then when my wife got pregnant, we moved out to just the outskirts of London, a little bit more space for children and to be closer to her family and things like that. And so now I live in a sort of leafy suburb called Gerrards Cross, good schools, all that kind of usual stuff. Probably a pretty typical story for people in London moving out when they have children and then basing myself from there.
So were you a singer or played an instrument?
All round, yeah. So I was in the choir in the cathedral, and I still sing today, actually, in my children's school choir. But I also play 4 instruments as well. I play piano probably for at least an hour a day, but I can also play the saxophone, double bass, and oboe.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Well, I'm not sure the connection yet between music and payments, but I'm sure we'll discover that along the way. Let's go ahead and talk about the company. So can you tell our audience what Phos does?
Yeah, so we work around the concept of softPOS, and softPOS is the enabling of contactless payments onto mobile phone devices without the requirement for additional exclusive payment hardware. So if you're familiar with SumUp or Zettle or terminals or anything like that, we're removing the requirement to have that payment-specific hardware in order to be able to accept a payment. And then what we built was, and this maybe is the tie to the music side of things already, but we built a softPOS orchestration platform to complement everything that sits around that, to complement the pain points that we saw with businesses that wanted to take a softPOS solution to market. In terms of numbers, we are 34, maybe 35 people today. As part of the acquisition by Ingenico, we're looking to grow that to at least 68 people in the coming months. So a large hiring drive in our Bulgarian-based development center. It's been a crazy ride the last 6 months going through the process of acquisition by Ingenico, but pretty fun at the same time and exciting to see what's coming next for us.
So is it any mobile device or just certain types of mobile devices?
It's what's defined as a COTS device, which is a commercial off-the-shelf device. So it's typically any mobile phone you yourself could go and get from a store today. It also includes devices that you might see around in use within stores. So just for an example, the Samsung X-Cover Pro is a device which is used in retail. There are devices from manufacturers like Honeywell and Zebra and other businesses like that, where they are not specifically EMV certified, so not specifically certified to be a payment device. And what we're doing is really replicating EMV level security in the cloud to be able to enable these types of devices to be used. And that includes iOS as a COTS device as well, iPhone as a COTS device.
And are there specific verticals that you focus on?
I would say no, but that's not a great answer. So there's things where this definitely has a better application than others and where we see low-hanging fruit and early adopters. But actually, we see this as potentially in use in all kinds of scenarios, anywhere that you might specifically see a payment happen today. Where we've seen it work really nicely in the early days is mobility. So within taxi, we saw that take off very quickly. We saw it in charity, so tap to donate, large scale, without the need to go and buy additional terminal estates and things like that. But we also see it in enterprise retail. So we have a partnership with Diebold Nixdorf where they are really looking at mobility as a concept within retail. And that can be enterprise tier one retail, or it can be luxury retail, or it can be food and beverage or anything like that, where you're really looking at an explosion of digital endpoints. If you think about, for example, a large retailer like Walmart might want it for queue busting. If you look at a large luxury retailer, they might want it for clienteling. If you look at food and beverage, if you're familiar with your sort of bar or restaurant where they have a couple of terminals behind the bar today and they're having to share it, or every time they're having to move it to a different table. But actually those servers, it could be many, many servers. They're all taking orders today on Android devices. And we can just say, okay, look, you can enable contactless acceptance on those devices you're already using to take orders without the requirement to invest in an extra 10, 20 terminals per outlet that you have.
Makes a lot of sense. And are there regions of the world or countries that you're in or not in?
So I'd say there's definitely countries that we're not in, but there are no regions that we are not. So we actually have live projects in all 5 inhabited continents at the moment. That was a nice claim to fame to be able to make. But we really saw an accelerated requirement globally in 2020 when the pandemic hit. So prior to that, we had a kind of pure UK, EU focus. We were just looking at where we could find opportunities there. And when the global lockdowns started happening, we really saw cash as a health and safety concern all over the world. And we started to see inbound requirements for projects in the Middle East, in Asia, in Australia, in Africa and South Africa, in Latin America, in North America. So we have live projects now in all those kinds of regions. We're not live in every country across Europe, for example. There's nothing stopping us. We just don't have specific clients or use cases in some of those countries.
And can you talk a little bit about your go-to-market strategy? So do you have a direct sales team? Do you have a partnership channel, or do you have both? How do you go to market?
So we have no direct-to-merchant sales. We are pure B2B2B, I suppose you would call it, where we are selling into primarily banks and acquirers, also PSPs and ISOs. And then we also have an SDK. So if we think about orchestration as a concept, where we sit as a technology layer on top of legacy financial institution platforms, we are also giving new fintechs the ability to embed payments acceptance within their own applications using our SDK. So those are the 2 sort of ways up and down the chain that we look at this, but it's always B2B, never to end merchant users.
Is it more of a SaaS model or a transaction fee model? How is the pricing?
It's a SaaS model, but it's flexible enough to work based on our own customers' business models. So yes, SaaS, if you think about it, we have a licensing type model. We look at projects upfront, scope them, see how much work there is involved, and there's an upfront project fee. We then have monthly licensing fees. And then there's a usage fee. And that usage fee is really flexible depending on, could be a fixed fee per active terminal user per month. It could be cents per transaction. It could be percentage of value processed. And in different parts of the world, we see people want, and in different verticals as well, we see people wanting to take a solution to market and for us to align with their own go-to-market. So when we built this orchestration platform, we also thought about how to do the pricing. And we also had projects from businesses that want to go live in Brazil with extremely high numbers of users, numbers of transactions, to businesses in Europe where it was potentially more of a failover, so low numbers of users, low potential numbers of transactions. And then in Asia, similar to Brazil, high numbers of users, high numbers of transactions. So we've built it out so that our partners, depending on how their go-to-market works, can take a commercial solution from us that works for them.
What would you say differentiates your company from your competitors out there?
What happened during the pandemic, and this helped us that we were sort of one of the first working in this space. I think we had a slightly earlier run on things. We saw our customers start to come to us and say, this is how we want to take tap to pay to market. And we saw that they were all really different. And we started to say, okay, we have this period of time where there are no card present transactions happening in the world, right? Because we're all stuck at home and can't go out and buy anything face to face. When we come out of this, how do we have a solution where no matter how or what the use case is that our customer wants to go to market, that we're able to provide for that story? And we also saw that people were looking at, well, launching with a proof of concept, moving to a white label model, and then potentially in 3 years' time having their own application and incorporating it. So we said, how do we build something where we can help them on that journey? So we're not just provisioning one solution and saying, take it or leave it. And I think that's predominantly where we saw our competitors go, is they said, this is the vertical that we are going to assist with, and this is the business model that we're going to fulfill. So we see some competitors that go direct to merchant and compete with the likes of SumUp and Zettle and terminal providers. We see some businesses that purely developed kernels, for instance. So you need to find an app builder, you need to find an acquirer, you need to complete the integration, you need to do the certification, and then you have a go-to-market. We said, let's, in a modular way, have all of these things. So no matter what someone wants, we can take them through that journey, we can take them down that path, we can be their trusted partner for softPOS. And I think no one else really has done that to the capacity that we've achieved. And now with the Ingenico ownership, that is only sort of exploding our capabilities from a global reach and leverage and distribution perspective.
Where do you see the industry headed? You can answer that sort of from a macro payments perspective or a more specific around maybe contactless payments. But either way, where do you see the industry headed in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
So I think the payments industry is a funny one. It's this sort of industry where you have this rapid change and constant innovation, while nothing ever changes very fast from a consumer perspective. The adoption by consumers is always sort of slow and steady. But there is all these things going on in the background. So from a short-term perspective, especially now with the economic state in different parts of the world, I can see a lot of consolidation happening, right? So a lot of M&A type activity, which we were a part of ourselves. And I see that sort of consolidation across all different types of players in our industry. It could be open banking, it could be softPOS, it could be crypto, any of these things that sort of touch our world. I think that's where we'll see in the next 2 to 3 years, large organizations bringing in smaller ones to bring more value, more features, more functionality to their own proposition, either because they're losing customers today to more dynamic players in the market, or because they want to be able to grow and expand into new geographies, new verticals, new sectors, that kind of thing.
I did want to touch on the whole contactless space, right? I think here in the US, it's still obviously growing. I think other parts of the world, it's maybe reaching maturity, but maybe could you speak to, because obviously you're not selling to consumers, but obviously consumer demand to pay using contactless has to be there for it to make sense, in your model. So can you talk about sort of maybe what's going on in the contactless world from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So this really is different depending on the geography. As you mentioned, some regions contactless has already reached 100% adoption, has been there for some time. Even Canada, Australia, UK, other countries across EU, contactless is already at 100% adoption when you look at card in wallet perspective. So every card in every wallet is contactless enabled. We talk about the US being a nascent market, right? So early days, but gathering speed significantly. The US is interesting because back in 2020, we definitely saw the US as being a region that we didn't even want to get into until sort of 2025. We were looking at, I think, something like 20% in terms of contactless adoption of card in wallet. Now, the pandemic really accelerated the turnaround of cards by the issuers. So all the banks started to make commitments that every card replacement they sent out would be contactless. I think we're already at like 50, 60%, something like that in the US. But also the rise of use of wallets like Google Pay and Apple Pay on the rise massively as well. So in terms of contactless transactions, it's growing fiercely in the US. In terms of consumer adoption, maybe a little slower. And there's a piece there that I think is really interesting in terms of what Apple are doing. So Apple was a big catalyst, I think, for the adoption of contactless in the US. And they're bringing out their solution now. They're enabling solutions for third parties. And as you start to see more and more of those, Apple's doing a great effort, I think, to educate the market on the security of contactless payments and give people the comfort factor that it is secure in new regions. I mean, UK and other markets, we've been using contactless payments for a long time, and it's already a very, very large percentage of our overall transactions. In the UK, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but our contactless limit is £100, which is significantly higher than most other regions across the EU. And there has been no significant uptick in terms of fraud or anything like that. So now people's preferred mode of payment at checkout is contactless. So we're starting to see that growth in other parts of the world. We're starting to see demand for these types of nice checkout products from interesting markets like Brazil and the surrounding countries there, where they have a huge number of people, a high barrier to adoption of hardware because of the cost and the distribution logistics. And in the US as well, which often is a little behind other regions when it comes to new payment technology and PIN and contactless and things like that. But when you have a big player like Apple starting to bring out a solution to market, that can really help move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So tell us about your journey to your role there as CEO.
Originally had no intention of working for Phos. I met with the founders. I thought what they had built was super cool. Definitely the future of payments, but I was in a role working as MD of Europe for a US headquartered PayFac called BlueSnap. And I really loved it there. Was really enjoying my time. We had closed some deals of significant size, and I couldn't really see myself leaving anytime soon. But I did want to help the team to bring the solution. We did have discussions and started to advise them on breaking away. Originally, this product, our softPOS product, was a part of a Bulgarian acquirer called Paynetics. And my recommendation to them was to split this product away and make it a standalone business, its own entity, its own office, its own people, its own IP, and then sell this solution as a white label to banks and other acquirers and PSPs all over the world, rather than just tying it into a single acquirer. So the founders went ahead and did that. I also reached out to some of my network, which if you've seen my CV, there's some big acquirers in there. Reached out to people that I've worked with in the past, asked them if this was interesting. It was interesting to everyone. Set up some meetings for them. They asked me to go along to those meetings with them as a sort of rapport building and relationship type thing, which I agreed to. Went along and I could see this was something that people were going to want. This was end of 2019. Fast forward to kind of March 2020, the pandemic had started to kick in. We started to see all these inbound requests from businesses all over the world. I helped them raise a little bit of money, went to meet with them, and they said, look, now's the time. You either need to come on board and really get involved with this, or we need to find a CEO that can come and run it. I spoke to my boss at BlueSnap, and he said, I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And if you're in for it, then you should take it. So I did and came on full time as CEO. I'd already hired a small team, a couple of UK salespeople that I'd worked with in the past in other businesses, and came on board and started to create this softPOS orchestration platform as a concept. And we built out more of a significant team in Bulgaria from a developer perspective, and really took it from there. And it's been exciting ever since. I'm still the CEO of Phos as a division within Ingenico, and it's going to be an interesting couple of years to see how we can really try and leverage and maximize on this position that we have with them.
Your timing aligning with the pandemic hitting is interesting. I'm kind of curious, what did you think when the pandemic started hitting? You had just taken this CEO role, and were you scared to death, or did you just see it as a huge opportunity?
The timing of it was really key because I was holding off and holding off and holding off. Like, we had a few interesting conversations going on that were really going to make it take off. But then when the pandemic started to take a hold, that was when we started to get businesses from all around the world saying, hey, we would like this, or we would like a version of this, or how can you make this work in Africa? How can you make this work in Egypt? And it was at that point, and we just raised some money where I was like, well, you know what, with this fundraise, we have enough money for sort of at least a year's worth of runway. I never imagined at the time that the lockdown was going to extend beyond a year, but we had enough money to build out the sort of idea which I had. And we had people prepared to pay for it, even though they weren't going to be using it for a period of time. That was the catalyst to kind of make me move as well. There's another sort of sideline there with helping BlueSnap to replace me there and how that worked. My wife at the time was working for Adyen. We'd gone into lockdown. We were locked in the same building. And she had met my previous CEO, and long story short, she ended up taking over my job as managing director of BlueSnap. It was all sort of incredible timing, great story. She's there, still there, running the business. But I was able to help her in the short term to come in, was able to educate and be support for her, even at a time when she couldn't go and meet colleagues, she couldn't go to the US for training or anything like that. Just an alignment of the stars. We were incredibly lucky.
That's a really cool story. Well, what are some things you're passionate about? So maybe one business-related passion and one personal passion.
Kind of have four. I always talk to my kids about the 4 Fs. One being family. I have 2 young kids at home. So work, travel, and things like that make it challenging, but I try to involve them. And they are always familiar with the latest business which I'm running or working for, and they have all the branded socks and things like that. They know all my colleagues. So I really try and make sure that family is always number one. I then have fitness, fintech, and flavors. The fitness thing, I'm not a fanatic, but I do try and prioritize my health. For example, this morning, first thing I did, new city in Atlanta, I got up and I went for a run around the city. And I think prioritizing your health, doing what I do, and for lots of people in their lives, doing what people do can be stressful. And I think you have to prioritize your health. So I always try and encourage my kids with that too, is fitness. Keep your health. Otherwise, if you lose your health, you can end up in a pretty dangerous position. Fintech is the work side of things. So it's probably the most straightforward one of these. I have been in fintech for almost all of my career. We're a payments family. My wife's in fintech. The kids talk about contactless payments and all this type of stuff. So it's a big part of my life. And then flavor. This is also something I try and discuss with my kids all the time. It's not flavored just in the sense of food, but it's about the flavor of life, trying new things, meeting new people, going to new places, saying yes to stuff, even if it's outside your comfort zone. All of these things contribute to the sort of recipe of life and making things interesting. And I think quite often, sometimes, especially in this industry, you can get stuck working around the same people all the time. It's a fairly small industry and things like that. I think you do have to try and push yourself. You have to try and push yourself, your business, to get into new areas, to maybe look at how can we be working with new partners. But all this type of stuff, that's what I call flavor.
I love the 4 Fs. It's a great guide for your life, right? Not just work and not just non-work, it's life. So I love that. I like to ask this question of CEOs and leaders because you usually get a unique perspective. If someone is coming into your company, say they're young, they're just out of school, and they see fintech as a future, and they come to you and they say, Brad, I'm looking at payments and fintech as building my career. what would you tell them? What advice would you give them to help them be successful in our industry?
Sure. So this is something I think about a lot. One of the joys about my job is that I get to hire a lot of people, and I like to hire people from outside the industry. It's a little bit harder. You have to go through an education process, but I like to bring people in that I see have an opportunity to be excited about this industry. And I always tell them a few things. Firstly, work hard. Like, what we do is not rocket science, but there is so much stuff to know. And that stuff is changing all the time, whether it's regulation or whether it's new specifics in new geographies, or whether it's new hardware that's out there or new payment rails or anything like this. You have to be prepared. If you want to be successful, you've got to be prepared to put the time in and constantly educate yourself, constantly upskill yourself. Never think that you're at the top of your game, because next week you're going to meet someone that's been doing this twice as long as you and knows twice as much as you. So always be ready to work hard and work on a part of it that you actually find interesting. So many people you see moving, they're bouncing from business to business to business. It's obvious they're actually trying to find a part that they find interesting. And once you find that thing, stick with it. You really, really get a grip of the understanding of what you're doing, of this piece that you find interesting. Because there's so many layers to what we do. If you dig down, there's always another level of information and understanding that you can get to that will help you succeed. I tell people to network. I'm sure you find this, but it's a surprisingly tight network of people around the world that work in this industry. Engage your competition, talk to your competition, network with everyone that touches this industry that we do, and be nice, because they could be your boss or a potential great new hire next week or next year or something. Like, never treat your competition with anything but the highest respect, because all of the challenges that you're going through, they're feeling it too. They may be even feeling it harder if they don't have a product that's as good as you, or they don't have the funding that you have or something. But they do have a real understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And then the last thing is to be patient, right? This industry, while it's exciting and it's innovative and it changes, and it's never going to change as slowly as it does today, it's always only going to get faster and faster. Things move slowly in what we do. Regulation can bog things down. Size of businesses that you have to work with, the underlying pins and rails of which everything works on, they're big organizations and they move slow. So it's like, focus on your bit that you find interesting, becoming the best at it, or as best as you can be, and being patient to find the time when your piece of it, slots in with some new change or some new organization. Don't bounce around. People that have worked for 10 different businesses doing 10 different things, or trying to sell 10 different bits and bobs, not very helpful. Real specialists in what they do that have a great overall understanding of the market, those are the people that you want to work with. I want to work with.
I think that's all really, really, really good advice. So, Brad, we've covered a lot of ground so far, obviously talking about the company, the industry as a whole, and then a little bit about you. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
That's good for me. It's interesting to talk about new people coming into the industry, because I think one area that we do have in this industry is growth. There's new things coming into it all the time, and we're constantly needing new, good people that are excited about coming in and working on something that in real life, no one ever said, hey, I love the way I paid for that, or I can't wait to see how I'm going to be able to pay for this thing. They're interested in the thing, not in the process. And the future of this industry is actually, how do we remove the engagement between us and the consumer? Uber's a great example. I never even think anymore about how my driver's getting paid. It all just happens. It's seamless. It's in the background. Businesses are looking at, how do we do that to the payment while holding on to consumer engagement? But they don't want their consumer engagement to be tied to the payment. And that's where all sorts of interesting comms channels and loyalty and that kind of stuff can really complement the payment piece, which sits at the core and is the minimum requirement of what we do. It's build out the value of that, take away the friction, take away the consumer experience specifically related to the payment, find the value in the consumer engagement.
Yeah. Well, what would be the best way? I know you're hiring and the company is growing. What would be the best way for people to learn more about the company and to outreach to the company and to you?
I think follow us on LinkedIn. We have all of our sort of roles and things like that going out on LinkedIn. I love it from a sales perspective if people proactively reach out to us. And I think almost all of our hires either come from people that, are internal referrals or proactive people that reach out to us. And then from a dev perspective, we have a lot of roles coming. We're building up this hub in Bulgaria, but if we find specific expertise, it can be remote. Digital nomads as a concept is something that we embrace to a degree, and we have some people that are really critical to our business that are based all over the place. So I'd say follow us, interact with us, engage with us, come find us at events. Like I'm at Transact right now, but we're always at events. We'll always be with Ingenico on their stands all over the world. So come and engage with us, come and talk to us. I think you'll find us, the whole team, to be nice people. Yeah, if we've got an opportunity that fits for you, then great. We'd love to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, Brad, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really want to respect that. But thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, nice to meet you, Greg. Good to talk.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.